We're not yet done, but so far the signal seems to be weaker. What's really interesting is, if you look carefully in the published science paper, is that hyperglycemia also induced a marked change in the gut microbiome composition and function, which didn't drive the tight junction phenotype. But nonetheless, it is interesting to follow up on, and maybe it has other impacts related to hyperglycemia.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Frank.
Okay, I have two questions, one for Rick and Vicente. So both of you talk about the divergent effects of diet drinks on body weight between the RCTs and observational studies. I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that the two types of studies are looking at different outcomes. So for the RCTs, of course, you're looking at weight loss and weight maintenance among people who are already overweight or obese. So we're talking about short-term effects of diet drinks or artificial sweetened beverages on weight loss, short-term weight loss. On the other hand, in observational analysis, we're looking at long-term weight gain. So the studies that Vicente presented, looking at whether increasing or decreasing consumption of ASBs is associated with more or less weight gain. So those are very different outcomes, and we need to look at them separately, both conceptually and methodologically. So that's one question. I think the second question is for Eran. In terms of your saccharine human study, so your study lasted for 7 days, right? 1 week.
The intervention, yeah.
Yeah, the intervention study lasted for 1 week. I was wondering how stable the changes in microbiome patterns based on very short-term intervention.
So my answer will be super short, so I'll answer first.
Okay.
We did test the reversibility of this short saccharine intervention, and what we found was, of course, this is a very small cohort, but the responders all reversed their microbiome configuration within a 2 to 10 week period after the cessation of exposure to saccharin. So it seems that at least this short-term intervention was fully reversible within a week's period.
So do you think these changes will be persistent over time?
Well, when you extrapolate from the yo-yo obesity study, there, in contrast to this very short intervention, a longer obesity-related exposure was associated with the development of this memory microbiome configuration, which in mice lasted to over 6 months. And in mice that live for 2 years, this could be a very persistent microbiome. We still don't know whether the same would be occurring in humans, and we're starting a clinical trial which tries to use the same tools that we developed for the mouse yo-yo trial in trying to identify whether a memory microbiome exists in human and what are the components, and whether we can even find some interventional targets in this memory configuration in human that would be interesting to follow up on.
So,
Your first seemed more a statement than a question, and I agree. I mean, there's clearly asymmetry in weight gain and weight loss in terms of the efforts involved. Your point's well taken. We have to be careful comparing the two.
Right, and I'll just add, with respect to the short-term trials, right, most of them are looking at weight loss among those who are overweight, but also the comparator group, I think, is another important thing to look at, whether the artificially sweetened or low-calorie beverages are being compared to water or compared to the sugar-sweetened. But I think Kara Ebling raised up the point yesterday in the couple trials in adolescents, so her trial with David Ludwig and the Dutch trial, which looked at replacing sugar-sweetened beverages with the artificially sweetened beverages, did show that there was less weight gain over the course of the study. So that's consistent with the longer-term cohort studies showing less weight gain with consumption of artificially sweetened beverages compared to some of the caloric beverages.
Right. Yeah, the follow-up question, I guess, related to what Rick found in his new trial on the potential differential effects of different type of sweeteners. So in Vasanti's analysis, which followed the cohort participants for several decades, can we speculate what type of sweeteners would be predominantly used by our participants?
Right. So in our cohorts, it's predominantly aspartame that would have been consumed during the course of the follow-up. I think in more recent years, in the more recent FFQs, there'll be we'll be able to there'll be some of the other low-calorie sweeteners that have entered into the food system. But really, what we're looking at is aspartame in our cohorts.
Yeah, and aspartame's an interesting one because it is so completely digested early in the GI tract, and in the trials that I reviewed, it had the least effect on insulin, and in our trial, it was basically neutral over the 12 weeks compared to saccharin and sucralose. So another reason to be cautious about extrapolating from one to the other.
Thank you.
I might just to your point, the one graph in the Azad paper that I sort of stumbled on, my mind went blank on, was a trial where they claimed in the forest plot that it led to weight gain, low-calorie sweetener led to weight gain. In fact, it just led to lesser weight loss, and we have to be very careful in how we present that data in the future.
Right. Yeah, might just make one quick comment on the study that we did, Mozafarian et al., which looked at weight change, weight gain mostly, over time, and I know Steve used it, that by design that study didn't include people with a BMI over 30. And as we've learned and looked at this in more detail, actually those people are particularly vulnerable to weight gain with sugar-sweetened beverages, and in some ways that if you haven't already gotten obese, living in an obesogenic environment with lots of soda around, you've got some sort of resistance, and our sort of average impact of sugar-sweetened beverages underestimated because we didn't include the very large part of the population with a BMI over 30. And some of our more recent analyses, we're making sure we include everybody and stratify by baseline BMI, because that does seem to be an important effect modifier. So it may, if you recalculate with some other data on your expected weight gain with sugar-sweetened beverages, your impact will probably be even higher, is what it would mean.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm actually surprised because I thought I'd read that paper. We looked at that really carefully. You excluded then everybody with a BMI over 30?
Right.
That's interesting.
Because we were looking at incidence of obesity. So
how did we miss that?
Right. Yeah, there were still 80,000 people left, but we excluded about 40,000. So go ahead.
I have two questions, if I could. The first for Dr. Mattis. You mentioned briefly, I see patients in a clinical setting, in a weight management setting, and I find it a decent number of the patients I've seen who are able to steer themselves away from drinks that include low-calorie sweeteners tell me that they tend to snack less, or they find that that's the case. You mentioned briefly that you don't think there's a lot of data that connects that to appetite stimulation or lack of appetite stimulation, but I wonder whether you could comment on that a little bit further.
So to what, let me understand, to what degree does consumption of sweetened beverages influence diet, snacking behavior, and so on?
Right, drive hunger or...
I don't think that there is a strong literature that sweetness drives hunger. You can really find sort of bimodal, in fact, relationships in the literature. The one interesting thing, we were talking about it when we were out on the fire drill, is consumption of sweetened beverages may or may not independently influence energy intake and body weight, but it also alters food choice. So Ashmakant and I did an analysis of and Haynes data, and it showed that sugar-sweetened beverages led to the ingestion of solid foods that had higher energy density. And it's probably just associative. We drink sodas often with hamburgers and French fries and so on. And so if you increase that kind of beverage just because of our culture, it means you're going to increase different kinds of food. So there is a relationship there that probably has to be paid attention to. It's a double whammy. It's contributing energy and it's altering the food choices you eat with it.
Right. My second question is for Dr. Gortmacher. In a very hypothetical world, you mentioned the cost savings that comes from a 1 cent per ounce tax. Has your model explored at all if sugar-sweetened beverages were to just disappear from the American palate, what sort of cost savings we would see?
No, we haven't done that. We try and focus on interventions that can be implemented in the real world.
Sure. And more just from a hypothetical curiosity standpoint, but I wonder if what you see the tipping point as in terms of whether we could get to 1.5 cents per ounce or 2 cents per ounce or even 3, where you see the sort of tax picture going in the future.
I think it's interesting. I mean, different places have implemented different taxes. You see a 2 cent per ounce in Boulder and 1.5 or 1.75. And I know we've estimated models for different health department groups of 3 cents. And people are looking at a range of different taxes. You will see greater changes, greater reductions in sugar beverage intake. And you'll also get some more revenue as you increase them. So we'll see. I mean, take a look at the history of tobacco taxes. When they were first implemented, people were saying, oh, you know, people won't stop smoking. Well, yeah, they did buy less cigarettes. It did cut, and rates went up over time. We'll see.
Yeah, I think Sarah, were you?
I just had a quick question for Steve. For the localities where you've seen the higher tax implemented, have you been able to track sort of sales across the border into other states? Are people sort of circumventing the higher cost by purchasing in other localities?
I think Sarah
Sarah
can
knows
probably
this.
talk about that. But if you
Yeah.
think about rational consumer behavior and you think about going, people are already shopping in particular places and buying a lot of groceries and foods, and very few individuals are going to say, well, I can calculate I can save, you know, $1 if I drive over here to buy these other goods. I mean, very few people are going to do that because, well, your time is worth money too, and gas and all this stuff. So certainly you'll see some of that happening at the margins, and I think Sarah's probably going to be looking at that a bit.
Yeah, so right now in the U.S., the only empirical data, so the only real-world data we have on beverage taxes is from Berkeley. And we will be shortly putting out data from Philadelphia. What they found in Berkeley is that there is some cross-border shopping, this idea that, well, I'll leave the taxed area to a non-taxed area to buy a lower price of soda or something else. But it's low. It's maybe 10 or 15%. It's not most people. And it's really only happening among people that are very close to those borders. So people are not going from city center all the way out to purchase beverages.
Yeah, just one other point about the magnitude of impact. I think it was partly behind your question. And I think the experience, again, from tobacco has been illustrative. What we're really trying to do is change culture here. And that drinking